When King Darius Blackthorn paid 1 silver coin for the Omega girl that every other bidder had rejected at the slave auction, the crowd thought he'd lost his mind, until they discovered she possessed the rare earth magic that could break the curse on his bloodline. But as Sera kneels trembling in his castle, wearing nothing but his cloak and the weight of a kingdom's expectations, one question burns between them. Can a broken Omega, who's never known her own worth, truly save the most powerful Alpha in the 7 kingdoms? The metal chains around Sera's wrists bit into her skin as she stumbled onto the wooden platform. Her bare feet slipped on the wet boards, and the crowd below roared with laughter. She pulled the torn blanket tighter around her shoulders, but it barely covered anything. The autumn morning felt like ice against her bruised arms and legs. "Look at this one," the fat auctioneer shouted, grabbing her chin roughly. His fingers smelled like old meat and wine, fresh from the wild lands. "Young Omega, ready for work." Sera tried to keep her head down, but he yanked her face up toward the crowd. Dozens of eyes stared back at her. Some looked hungry. Others looked disgusted. Most looked bored. Her wolf spirit curled up small inside her chest, trying to hide. She could feel it shaking just like her body was shaking. The animal part of her wanted to run, to fight, to howl, but there was nowhere to go. Iron bars surrounded the platform on 3 sides, and the 4th side dropped down into a crowd of people who would catch her before she took 2 steps. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" the auctioneer called out. Nobody raised their hand. The man next to the platform spat into the dirt. "She's too skinny. Look at those ribs showing." "Probably diseased," said a woman in fancy clothes. "Wild Omegas carry sickness." "And she smells wrong," added a merchant with gold teeth. "Not like a proper Omega should smell." Sera's cheeks burned red with shame. She knew she smelled different. The other Omegas in the holding cells had told her so. They said she smelled like dirt and growing things instead of flowers and sweetness. They said no Alpha would ever want someone who smelled like a farm. "Come now," the auctioneer tried again, his voice getting desperate. "She's young, strong. Look at those muscles in her arms." "Muscles on an Omega?" The gold-toothed merchant laughed. "What Alpha wants a mate who looks like she could fight back?" More laughter from the crowd. Sera felt tears starting in her eyes, but she blinked them away fast. Crying would only make things worse. The auctioneer had told her that yesterday when he locked her in the cage. "Fine, fine." The man on the platform wiped sweat from his forehead. "Let's start the bidding low, very low. How about 5 silver pieces?" Silence. 4 silver? Nothing. 3? A few people shook their heads and started walking away. Sera watched them leave and felt something cold settle in her stomach. What happened to Omegas that nobody wanted to buy? The other girls in the cells had whispered stories, but they always stopped talking when the guards came near. The sun climbed higher in the sky, making the platform hot under her feet. Sweat mixed with the tears she was trying not to cry. Her legs shook from standing so long, but the auctioneer had warned her not to sit down or look weak. 2 silver pieces, he called out, his voice cracking a little. "She's not worth 2 copper pieces," someone yelled back. The crowd was getting smaller. Soon, there would be nobody left to bid at all. Sera closed her eyes and tried to find her wolf spirit again. When she was little, before the bad men came to her village, her grandmother had taught her to talk to the animal inside her. "Every Omega has a wolf," grandmother had said. "She will keep you strong when nothing else can." But now her wolf felt so small and scared, like a puppy hiding under a bed during a thunderstorm. 1 silver piece, the auctioneer shouted. "Surely someone will bid 1 silver piece." The remaining people in the crowd looked at each other, but nobody moved. Sera opened her eyes and stared up at the gray sky. Maybe this was how her story would end. Maybe she would die here on this platform, unwanted and alone, just like her parents had died when the soldiers burned their house down. The thought should have scared her, but instead she felt strangely calm. At least dying would mean no more cages, no more hands grabbing at her, no more voices telling her she was worthless. "Going once," the auctioneer called out. The crowd started moving toward the other platforms where prettier Omegas stood waiting. Going twice, Sera took a deep breath and tried to remember what fresh air smelled like in the forest where she grew up. Before everything went wrong. What's the starting bid for this one? The voice hit the crowd like lightning hitting a tree. Everyone stopped moving. Everyone stopped talking. Even the birds in the nearby trees seemed to go quiet. Sera's eyes snapped open and her head turned toward the voice. At the edge of the platform stood the biggest man she had ever seen. He wore black armor that gleamed like water, and a dark cloak hung from his shoulders. His hair was black too, and it hung down to his collar in waves. But it was his eyes that made her forget how to breathe. They were gray like storm clouds, and they were looking right at her. "Your Majesty!" The auctioneer dropped to one knee so fast he almost fell over. This Omega has been rejected by every bidder today. Perhaps you would prefer one of the others? We have several fine specimens on the other platforms. The big man, the king, stepped closer to the platform. Sera could smell him now, and her wolf spirit suddenly lifted its head inside her chest. He smelled like pine trees and leather and something else she couldn't name. Something that made her wolf want to come out of hiding. "I asked about this one," the king said. His voice was deep and quiet, but somehow everyone in the square could hear every word. "What's the price?" The auctioneer's hands shook as he stood back up. "Well, sire, we were asking 1 silver piece, but truly she's not worthy of your attention. Look at her. Wild, undisciplined, probably can't even read." "Can you read?" the king asked Sera directly. She jumped when he spoke to her. Nobody had asked her a question all day. They had only talked about her like she was a piece of furniture. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, Your Majesty." "What's your name?" "Sera, Your Majesty." He nodded once, then looked back at the auctioneer. 1 silver piece, you said?" "Yes, but truly, sire, I cannot recommend." "Sold." The word rang out across the square like a bell. Sera felt her knees go weak. The king had bought her. The actual king. She didn't understand why, but she was too shocked to think about it clearly. The crowd pressed closer to the platform, everyone talking at once. "The king bought the reject Omega. What does he want with her? Maybe she has some special skill we don't know about? More likely he's just being kind. You know how he is about lost causes." The king ignored all of them. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a single silver coin. The auctioneer took it with shaking hands. "Remove her chains," the king ordered. "Of course, sire, of course." The auctioneer fumbled with a key ring, trying several keys before finding the right one. The metal cuffs fell away from Sera's wrists, leaving red marks on her skin. The king stepped up onto the platform. Up close, he was even bigger than he had looked from below. He had to be more than 6 feet tall, and his shoulders were broad enough to block out the sun. But his gray eyes weren't mean or scary. They looked sad, somehow. "Are you hurt?" he asked her quietly. Sera shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Can you walk?" She nodded. The king reached up and unclasped his heavy cloak. Before she knew what was happening, he had wrapped it around her shoulders. The cloth was warm and soft and smelled like him. It was so big on her that it hung down past her knees, covering her much better than the torn blanket had. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked surprised, like he hadn't expected her to thank him. "Your Majesty." A man in fancy clothes pushed through the crowd. "Surely you're not serious about this purchase. The council has been expecting you to choose a mate from the noble families. This is just a wild Omega from the outlands." The king turned to look at the man, and Sera saw something dangerous flash in his gray eyes. The wolf part of her shivered with recognition. This was what an alpha looked like when someone challenged him. "Lord Bradford," the king said calmly, "when did you start telling me how to spend my money?" Lord Bradford's face went white. I didn't mean. I was only thinking of the good of the kingdom." "The good of the kingdom is my concern, not yours." The king's voice stayed quiet, but there was steel underneath it. "Now step aside." The crowd parted like water as the king walked toward his horse. Sera hurried to keep up with his long strides, the cloak swirling around her ankles. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. He looked down at her as he reached his horse. "Home," he said simply. Then he lifted her up onto the saddle, like she weighed nothing at all. The massive castle doors slammed shut behind Sera with a sound like thunder. She had never seen anything so grand in her entire life. Gold sparkled on the walls like captured sunlight, and paintings of fierce wolves stared down at her from every corner. Her bare feet sank into carpets softer than clouds, but she felt more lost than ever before. King Darius walked ahead of her, his heavy boots echoing through halls that seemed to stretch on forever. Servants bowed low as he passed, but their eyes followed Sera with curiosity and quiet judgment. She pulled his enormous cloak tighter around herself, drowning in fabric that smelled like pine trees and something wild she couldn't name. "Your Majesty," a stern woman appeared, dressed in crisp white clothes. "Shall I prepare the guest chambers for your purchase?" The word hit Sera like a slap. Purchase, that's all she was. Something bought with a single silver coin. "The Blue Tower room," Darius replied without looking back. "See that she has everything she needs." Everything she needs. Sera almost laughed. What she needed was to understand why the most powerful man in 7 kingdoms had bought a worthless Omega girl when he could have anyone. The woman, who introduced herself as head housekeeper Mills, led Sera up a winding staircase that seemed to climb toward the very stars. With each step, Sera's legs shook more. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the auction platform had been her bed for 3 nights running. "Here we are, dear," Mrs. Mills said, opening a heavy wooden door. Sera's mouth fell open. The room was bigger than the entire shack where she'd grown up. A bed large enough for 4 people sat in the center, covered in blankets the color of summer sky. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showing gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace, filling the room with warmth that made her bones stop aching for the first time in weeks. "The king has requested that you join him for dinner," Mrs. Mills continued, laying out clothes on the bed. "These should fit well enough." Sera stared at the dress. It was simple but beautiful, made of soft green cloth that reminded her of forest leaves. She had never owned anything so fine. "Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. Mrs. Mills paused in her work. "Why what, child? Why did he buy me? I'm nobody special. I can't even shift properly." Sera's wolf had always been weak, barely able to surface even during the full moon. The older woman's expression softened. "Perhaps you should ask him yourself." Left alone, Sera touched everything in the room with wonder. The soap smelled like flowers, the towels felt like silk against her skin. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Clean and dressed in fine clothes, she almost looked like she belonged here. Dinner was served in a room only slightly smaller than her entire village square. King Darius sat at one end of a table long enough to seat 20 people, and he gestured for her to sit beside him rather than at the far end. This small kindness made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "You look better," he said simply, cutting into meat that smelled better than anything she'd ever imagined. Sera nodded, not trusting her voice. The food before her could have fed her family for a week, back when she had a family. "Eat," Darius encouraged. "You're too thin." She ate slowly, trying to remember the manners her mother had taught her before the sickness took her whole family. The king watched her with those storm-gray eyes, but not in a way that made her feel like prey, more like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "The people are talking," he said finally. "They wonder why I chose you." Sera's hand froze halfway to her mouth. "So do I. What do you know about curses?" The question came from nowhere, making her blink in surprise. Only stories. Old tales about magic and consequences. Darius leaned back in his chair. "My family has been cursed for 3 generations. No male heir has lived past his 30th birthday. I turned 30 in 6 months. The food in Sera's mouth suddenly tasted like ash. But you're the king. Surely there's someone who can help. We've tried everything. Every healer, every wise woman, every court wizard. His voice carried years of disappointment. The curse can only be broken by an Omega with earth magic. Such bloodlines died out 50 years ago. Then why, Sera began. But he held up a hand. At the auction, I smelled something different about you. Something the others missed. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. When you were afraid, really afraid, what happened around you? Sera's mind raced back to the worst moments of her life. Her family's death, being thrown out of her village. The first night on the auction platform when 3 alphas had circled her like hungry wolves. Plants, she whispered. Thorns grew from the ground. Roots wrapped around their feet. Darius smiled for the first time since she'd met him, transforming his stern face into something almost boyish. Earth magic. Dormant, untrained, but real. That's impossible. Omegas don't have magic. This Omega does. He reached across the table, his large hand covering her small one. The question is, will you help me break this curse? Sera stared at their joined hands. His skin was warm and rough from sword practice, while hers was soft from a life of doing nothing important. The difference between them felt as vast as the ocean. What happens if I can't? She asked. Then I die in 6 months. My cousin takes the throne, and you live here in comfort for the rest of your days. His grip tightened slightly. But if you can break it, then what? Then you save not just my life, but the entire kingdom. My cousin is not a good man, Sera. Under his rule, people like you, the weak, the different, the forgotten, will suffer. The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yesterday, she had been nothing, worth only a single silver coin. Today, she held the fate of a kingdom in her hand. But as she looked into Darius's eyes, she saw something that made her heart race for an entirely different reason. Hope, not just for his kingdom or his life, but for something growing between them that neither had expected. I'll try, she whispered. The smile he gave her was brighter than all the gold in his castle. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and neither of them noticed the dark figure watching from the garden shadows, fury twisting features that had once been beautiful. The training yard rang with the clash of steel on steel, but Sera's attention was on the woman watching from the balcony above. Lady Vivienne Ashford stood like a statue carved from ice, her perfect blonde hair catching the morning sunlight. Even from 50 feet away, Sera could feel the hatred rolling off her in waves. Focus, Master Eldon snapped, his gnarled hand pointing toward the small pile of stones. Magic requires concentration, not daydreaming about court politics. Sera dragged her eyes back to the lesson. For 3 weeks, the old wizard had been teaching her to control her earth magic, and the results were disappointing. The best she could manage was making a single flower bloom, or convincing a vine to grow an inch longer. I can't do this, she said, frustration making her voice crack. Maybe you were wrong about me. Master Eldon's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. Child, I've been training magic users for 60 years. You have more raw power sleeping in your bones than I've ever seen. The problem isn't ability, it's fear. I'm not afraid, Sera protested, even as her hands shook. You're terrified, he corrected gently. Afraid of failing, afraid of succeeding, afraid of what happens either way. Before Sera could argue, footsteps echoed across the courtyard. King Darius approached, still wearing his council robes from the morning's meetings. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and new lines of worry had appeared around his mouth. The curse was taking its toll more quickly now. How goes the training? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. She has the power, Master Eldon reported, but something blocks her from reaching it. Darius studied Sera with those piercing gray eyes. Walk with me. They left the training yard together, moving through gardens where servants whispered behind their hands. Sera had learned to ignore the stares and comments, but they still stung like thorns against her skin. The council met again today, Darius said, as they reached a quiet grove of apple trees. They're pressuring me to choose a traditional mate, someone with proven bloodlines. Sera's stomach dropped. Lady Vivienne, among others. He stopped walking and turned to face her. They think I'm wasting precious time on impossible magic. Maybe they're right. The words tasted bitter, but Sera forced them out. Maybe I am just a broken Omega who got lucky. Darius moved closer, close enough that she could smell the soap he used and see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Do you know what I see when I look at you? Sera shook her head, not trusting her voice. Strength. Not the kind that comes from muscles or titles, but the kind that survives when everything else falls apart. You've lost everyone you loved, been rejected by your own people, sold like property, and you're still here, still fighting. His words made her chest tight with emotion she didn't want to feel. Getting attached to him would only make everything hurt worse when she failed. That's not strength, she whispered. That's just stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. A commotion from the castle interrupted whatever he might have said next. Shouts echoed from the main courtyard, followed by the sound of running feet. Darius's hand went immediately to his sword. Stay here, he commanded. But Sera was already following him back toward the castle. They arrived to find chaos. A merchant's wagon sat overturned in the courtyard, its contents scattered across the stones. The merchant himself lay unconscious beside his horse, blood trickling from a head wound. Castle guards surrounded the scene, their faces grim. What happened? Darius demanded. Captain Hayes stepped forward, his armor clanking. Bandits, Your Majesty. They hit the trade road just outside the western gate. This merchant barely escaped to warn us. How many attacked? At least 20, maybe more. They're organized, well-armed. Hayes's expression darkened. And they're asking questions about the Omega girl. Sera's blood turned to ice. About me? Someone's paying them to gather information, Hayes continued. They want to know about your magic training, your connection to the king. Darius's face became a mask of cold fury. Double the guards on the castle. Nobody enters or leaves without my permission. His eyes found Sera. You don't go anywhere alone. Not the gardens, not the training yard. Nowhere. But who would? Sera began, then stopped as understanding hit her like a physical blow. She looked up at the balcony where Lady Vivienne had been watching earlier. The space was empty now, but somehow that felt even more threatening. She wants me gone, Sera whispered. We don't know that, Darius said, but his tone suggested he suspected the same thing. Yes, we do. Sera's voice grew stronger as pieces fell into place. I'm a threat to her plans. If I can break the curse, you won't need to marry her for political reasons. Captain Hayes cleared his throat uncomfortably. There's more, Your Majesty. The bandits weren't just asking questions. They had specific orders. What orders? To take the Omega alive, but make it look like an accident during the kidnapping. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Someone wanted Sera captured, which meant someone wanted her to disappear permanently. And there was only one person at court, with both the motivation and resources to arrange such a thing. I need to leave, Sera said suddenly. If I'm not here, she can't use me against you. You can marry Lady Vivienne, have strong children, find another way to break the curse. No. Darius's voice cut through her words like a blade. Running won't solve anything. It will only prove to everyone that you're exactly what they think you are, weak. The accusation stung because part of her believed it was true. Maybe I am weak. Then prove them wrong. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Show them what I see. Show them the woman who survived, losing everything, and still has room in her heart for hope. What if I can't control my magic in time? Then we face whatever comes together. The word together did something strange to Sera's chest. Made her feel like maybe she wasn't facing the world completely alone anymore. But before she could respond, Screams erupted from the castle's main entrance. They turned to see guards struggling with a figure in a dark cloak. As the guards pulled the hood back, Sera gasped. It was Mira, a girl from her old village who'd been sold at the same auction. "Sera," Mira called out, her voice desperate. "They took her. They took Kyla." Kyla had been another Omega from the auction, bought by a merchant from the eastern provinces. She was barely 16, with big brown eyes and a smile that reminded Sera of her little sister. "Who took her?" Darius demanded, his voice carrying all the authority of his crown. "Men in black clothes. They said they were collecting debts, but I heard them talking. They're taking Omega girls, all the ones from our auction." Mira's eyes filled with tears. They said Sera was next. The courtyard fell silent, except for the sound of Mira's sobbing. Sera felt the world tilt around her, as understanding crashed down like a wave. This wasn't just about stopping her from breaking the curse. Someone was collecting Omega girls specifically from their auction. "Why?" she whispered. "What do they want with us?" Master Eldon appeared at her elbow, his face pale, with a fear she'd never seen before. "There are old rituals," he said quietly. "Dark magic that requires the blood of specific bloodlines." "What kind of rituals?" Darius asked, though his tone suggested he didn't want to hear the answer. "The kind that steal magic from one person and give it to another." Master Eldon's voice dropped to barely audible. "If someone discovered that Sera carries the last earth magic bloodline, they might try to take it for themselves." Sera's knees nearly buckled. Not only was she supposed to save the kingdom with magic she couldn't control, but now someone wanted to steal that magic and probably kill her in the process. "How long do we have?" Darius asked. "These rituals require specific timing. The next dark moon is in 10 days. 10 days. Sera had 10 days to master magic she'd barely begun to understand, or risk losing it forever to someone who would use it for evil purposes. As if responding to her terror, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. Tiny cracks appeared in the stone courtyard, and green shoots pushed through, growing at an impossible speed. Everyone stepped back as flowers bloomed around Sera's feet in a perfect circle, their petals glowing with soft light. For a moment, the courtyard was silent with wonder. Then Sera collapsed, overwhelmed by power she didn't understand and terrified by everything she'd just learned. But as Darius caught her in strong arms that felt like safety itself, she realized something important. Her magic was strongest when she was protecting someone else. The question was, would that be enough to save them all? The screaming started at dawn, echoing through the castle halls like a wounded animal. Sera's eyes snapped open in her luxurious bed, sweat covering her skin despite the cool morning air. The nightmares were getting worse. But these weren't just bad dreams, they were memories trying to break free from the dark corners of her mind. She stumbled to the window, pressing her palms against the cold glass. In the courtyard below, King Darius was training with his guards, his sword cutting through the air with deadly grace. Even from this distance, she could feel the pull between them, like invisible threads connecting their souls. But something was wrong. The earth beneath the castle felt restless, angry, responding to emotions she couldn't control. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the kind servants who brought her meals. Instead, a small boy with dirt-smudged cheeks peeked around the door. He couldn't be more than 8 years old, with bright green eyes that reminded her of spring leaves. "Are you the magic lady?" he whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "My mama says you can make flowers grow." Sera's heart clenched. "What's your name, little one?" "Finn. I work in the kitchens." He stepped closer, pulling something from his pocket, a wilted daisy, brown and dying. "My sister gave this to me before she got sick. The healers say she won't get better, but I thought maybe magic could help." The flower trembled in his small hands. Sera had never tried to heal anything living before. Her magic was wild, unpredictable, sometimes dangerous. What if she made things worse? But looking at Finn's hopeful face, she couldn't say no. Let me try, she said gently, taking the daisy. The moment her fingers touched the stem, power rushed through her like lightning. But instead of the sharp, angry magic she'd felt before, this was warm, golden, full of love. The flower straightened in her palm, its petals brightening to pure white, more beautiful than it had ever been. Finn gasped, his eyes wide with wonder. You really are magic. Take this to your sister, Sera said, handing back the transformed daisy. But don't tell anyone where you got it, okay? After Finn left, Sera felt different, stronger somehow. Maybe her magic wasn't just about destruction. Maybe it could create beauty too. But before she could explore this new feeling, another knock came at her door. This time, it was King Darius himself, still sweaty from training, his dark hair falling across his forehead. We need to talk, he said, his voice serious. There are things about your past you need to know. He led her to his private study, a room filled with ancient books and strange artifacts. On his desk lay an old leather journal, its pages yellow with age. This belonged to my mother, he explained, opening to a page covered in elegant handwriting. She wrote about a prophecy, about an Omega with earth magic, who would either save our kingdom or destroy it. Sera's blood turned cold. Destroy it? The prophecy says the Omega will face a choice when the blood moon rises. She can use her power to break the curse on my family line, bringing peace to the land. Or, he paused, his jaw tight. She can let the darkness inside her take control and watch everything burn. What darkness? Sera asked, though deep down she already knew. She'd felt it during her nightmares, a hungry presence that whispered terrible things in her ear. Darius moved closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. The same force that cursed my family also touched yours. Your parents didn't abandon you, Sera. They were killed trying to protect you from it. You were hidden away as a baby, your memories locked away to keep you safe. The room seemed to spin around her. Everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. How do you know all this? Because I've been searching for you my whole life, he admitted, his storm-gray eyes intense. The curse can only be broken by willing sacrifice. But it has to be your choice, completely free. That's why I couldn't tell you before, why I had to wait for you to trust me. Sera pulled away, her mind racing. So you didn't save me from that auction because you cared. You needed me to break your curse. No. The word came out sharper than he intended. That's not it started that way. Yes. But everything changed the moment I saw you. The way you held your head high even when they called you worthless. The kindness in your eyes despite everything you'd suffered. I fell in love with your strength, Sera, not your magic. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her heart. How can I trust anything you say? You've been lying to me since the beginning. Because of this, he said, reaching into his shirt to pull out a chain. Hanging from it was half of a silver pendant, broken jaggedly down the middle. My mother gave this to me before she died. She said I'd know my true mate when I found the other half. With shaking hands, Sera reached for the moonstone pendant he'd given her days ago. As she held it up, she saw the truth: it wasn't complete. The break along one edge matched his silver piece perfectly. When she pressed them together, both pendants glowed with soft, warm light. We were meant to find each other, Darius whispered. Curse or no curse, prophecy or no prophecy. My wolf knew you before my mind did. But as the pendant's light faded, a new sound reached their ears, horns blowing from the castle walls, urgent and afraid. Darius rushed to the window, his face going pale. No, it's too early. The blood moon isn't supposed to rise for 3 more days. In the distance, the sky was turning an ominous shade of red, even though the sun hadn't set. And beneath their feet, the ground began to tremble, responding to a power much darker than anything Sera had felt before. What's happening? She asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. The curse is accelerating, Darius said grimly. Something is forcing the prophecy to fulfill itself, and if we're not ready. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. If Sera couldn't control her power in time, the kingdom wouldn't survive to see another dawn. The red sky bled across the horizon like an open wound, and with it came chaos. Sera pressed her face against the study window, watching in horror as panic spread through the castle grounds below. Guards ran in every direction, shouting orders that no one seemed to understand. In the distance, she could see the forest writhing like a living thing, trees bending and twisting in ways that defied nature. "The darkness is calling to your power," Darius said behind her, his voice tight with worry. "It wants you to lose control, to let anger and fear drive your magic instead of love." As if summoned by his words, a familiar laugh echoed through the room, cold, cruel, and definitely not coming from either of them. The temperature dropped so suddenly that Sera could see her breath, and shadows began pooling in the corners like spilled ink. "Found you at last, little Omega," the voice hissed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Did you really think you could hide from your true nature forever?" Sera spun around, searching for the source, but saw only Darius drawing his sword, his eyes scanning the room for threats that couldn't be fought with steel. "Who are you?" she demanded, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I am the one who killed your parents," the voice replied, and now it seemed to come from the shadows themselves. "The one who placed the curse on the Blackthorn line, the one who has been waiting 20 years for you to ripen into the perfect weapon." The shadows coalesced into a figure, tall, elegant, wearing a cloak that seemed made of midnight itself. But it was the face that made Sera's blood freeze. It was beautiful and terrible, with eyes like black stars and a smile that promised only pain. "Morgana," Darius breathed, his sword already moving in a defensive arc. "You're supposed to be dead. Death is such a limiting concept." The sorceress replied with amusement. "I prefer to think of it as a temporary inconvenience. Besides, I had work to finish, a prophecy to fulfill, a kingdom to claim." She gestured elegantly. An invisible force slammed Darius against the wall, his sword clattering uselessly to the floor. "Don't worry, young king. You'll live just long enough to watch your precious Omega destroy everything you love." "No!" Sera stepped forward, power crackling around her like lightning made of earth and growing things. "I won't let you hurt him." "Oh, child," Morgana laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You still don't understand, do you? I'm not here to hurt him. You are. That's what the prophecy really means. Not that you'll choose between saving or destroying the kingdom, but that you'll have no choice at all. The darkness inside you will consume everything, starting with the one person you care about most." Sera felt it then, the hungry presence she'd sensed in her nightmares. It was stronger now, feeding on her fear and anger, whispering seductive promises of power. She could end all her pain, all her suffering, if she just let go. She could make everyone who had ever hurt her pay. She could burn the world and start fresh. "Fight it, Sera," Darius called from where he was pinned against the wall. "You're stronger than she is. You have something she doesn't." "What could this broken little Omega possibly have that I lack?" Morgana sneered, raising her hand to send another wave of dark magic toward him. But Sera was faster. Earth erupted from the stone floor, creating a barrier between Morgana and Darius. The effort made her stagger, but she stood firm. "Love," she said simply. "I have love." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Morgana's beautiful face. Love is weakness. Love is what got your parents killed. Love is what will destroy you in the end. "Maybe," Sera admitted, feeling the darkness pulling at her mind like quicksand. "But it's also what makes me human, what makes me choose to protect instead of destroy." The pendant around her neck grew warm, and she felt Darius's presence like an anchor in a storm. His faith in her, his love, gave her strength to push back against the hungry whispers in her head. But it wasn't enough. The darkness was too strong, too patient. It had been growing inside her for 20 years. "You cannot win," Morgana said, her voice full of certainty. "I made sure of that when you were born. The curse doesn't just affect the Blackthorn line, it affects you too. Every time you use your magic, you feed the darkness. And you've been using it quite a lot lately, haven't you? Sera's heart sank as she realized the truth. The healing she'd done for little Finn, the protective barriers she'd raised, even the simple act of making flowers bloom, all of it had made the darkness stronger. She'd been playing right into Morgana's hands without knowing it. That's right, the sorceress continued, sensing her despair. Every act of kindness, every moment of joy, every time you dared to hope, all of it was feeding the very force that will destroy this kingdom. Isn't irony delicious? The shadows around Morgana grew thicker, reaching towards Sera like grasping fingers. Now come, child. Let me show you what you're truly capable of. Let me show you how beautiful destruction can be. The darkness pressed against Sera's mind, and for a moment, she almost gave in. It would be so easy to stop fighting, to let someone else make the choices. But then she heard something that changed everything. The sound of running footsteps in the hallway outside. "Lady Sera!" It was Finn's voice, high and frightened. "Lady Sera, where are you? My sister is asking for you." The little boy burst through the door, still clutching the white daisy she'd healed, his green eyes wide with terror at the scene before him. He didn't understand what he was seeing, the floating sorceress, the shadows that moved like living things, the way power crackled in the air like before a storm. All he knew was that the magic lady who had helped his sister was in trouble. "Get away from her!" Finn shouted with all the bravery his 8-year-old heart could muster, throwing himself between Sera and Morgana. Time seemed to slow. Morgana's hand moved, dark magic gathering around her fingers, aimed not at Sera but at the brave little boy who had tried to protect her. In that instant, Sera understood the real choice the prophecy offered. Not between saving or destroying the kingdom, but between letting others suffer for her power or taking responsibility for it herself. The darkness whispered that she could save Finn by destroying Morgana, by unleashing all her rage and pain in one devastating attack. But Sera remembered what Darius had said about willing sacrifice, about choices made freely. She remembered the warmth she'd felt when healing the daisy, the way love had made her magic gentle instead of destructive. "I choose love," she said quietly, and stepped directly into the path of Morgana's attack. The dark magic hit her like a physical blow, but instead of destroying her, it met something unexpected, the same golden power she'd felt when healing Finn's flower. The two forces clashed inside her, darkness and light, destruction and creation, fighting for control of her very soul. But Sera wasn't fighting anymore. She was accepting the darkness as part of herself, but not the only part. Accepting that she could choose what to feed, what to nurture, what to let grow. The pendant around her neck blazed with brilliant light as she embraced both sides of her nature and made them whole. The explosion of power that followed shook the entire castle. But when the light faded, 3 figures still stood in the room. Morgana stared in shock, her perfect composure finally cracked. Finn clutched his daisy, unharmed but awed. And Sera stood transformed, no longer fighting against her magic but one with it. Darkness and light balanced in perfect harmony. But the real test was just beginning. Outside, the blood moon had fully risen, and the prophecy demanded its final answer. The golden sunrise painted the castle walls like honey as Sera woke to find blood on her hands. Not her own blood, Lady Vivienne's from their midnight battle, but something else had changed overnight. Her reflection in the mirror showed eyes that sparkled with tiny flecks of gold. And when she touched the cracked stone windowsill, green vines sprouted between her fingers without any effort at all. "The magic is growing stronger," she whispered to herself. But footsteps in the hallway made her quickly hide her glowing hands behind her back. 3 soft knocks on her door meant only one person could be visiting this early. "Come in, Darius." The king entered carrying a breakfast tray, but his storm-gray eyes immediately found the new flowering vines crawling up her wall. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Good morning to you too, little earth goddess." Heat rushed to her cheeks. I didn't mean for that to happen. Ever since last night, the magic feels different, like it wants to burst out of me all the time. That's because the curse is almost completely broken. He set the tray on her small table and moved closer. But we have a problem. Her heart sank. What kind of problem? The good kind. His smile grew wider. My advisors want to throw you a celebration feast. The whole kingdom wants to meet their future queen. The word queen still felt strange in her mouth. 3 weeks ago, she had been sleeping in dirty straw, wearing rags, and eating scraps. Now servants brought her meals on silver plates. And the most powerful man in 7 kingdoms was asking her to rule beside him. I don't know how to be a queen, she admitted, sinking onto the edge of her soft bed. I don't know fancy table manners or how to make important decisions. What if I mess everything up? Darius knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his much larger ones. Do you remember what you told me yesterday? About choosing what to give instead of worrying about what others think you're worth? She nodded. The Pack Council met this morning. They don't care if you know which fork to use for salad. They care that you risked your life to save mine. They care that your magic can heal our sick children and make our crops grow strong. His thumbs brushed across her knuckles. They care that you make their king happy for the first time in 10 years. But what if Lady Vivienne was right? What if I'm too weak to give you strong babies? A low growl rumbled from his chest. Vivienne was wrong about everything. You're not weak, you're the strongest person I know. You survived years of being told you were worthless, and you still chose to help others. That's not weakness. That's pure steel, wrapped in silk. Tears pricked her eyes. You really believe that? I know it. He stood and pulled her to her feet. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her through corridors she had never seen before, down stone steps that spiraled deep into the castle's foundation. Their footsteps echoed in the darkness until they reached a heavy wooden door marked with ancient symbols. What is this place? The Royal Vault, where we keep our most precious treasures. He pressed his palm against the door, and it swung open with a deep groan. Inside, gold coins and jeweled crowns glittered in the torchlight. But Darius walked past all the riches to a simple glass case in the center of the room. Inside lay a crown unlike any she had ever seen, not made of gold or silver, but of living wood twisted into delicate branches, with tiny emerald leaves that seemed to sway in an invisible breeze. The Earth Crown, he said softly, made for the first Omega Queen 300 years ago. It's been waiting for someone worthy to wear it. Sera's breath caught in her throat. It's beautiful. My mother was supposed to wear it, but she died before her coronation. The crown has been sleeping ever since, waiting for another Omega with Earth magic. He opened the case and lifted the crown carefully. It will only accept someone pure of heart. What happens if it doesn't accept me? Then we'll make you a different crown. But I have a feeling. He held it above her head. May I? Her heart hammered against her ribs as she nodded. The moment the wooden crown touched her hair, warmth spread through her entire body. The emerald leaves began to glow softly, and tiny white flowers bloomed along the branches. She felt a connection to every tree, every blade of grass, every growing thing in the kingdom. How do I look? She asked, afraid to move. Darius stared at her with such wonder in his eyes that she felt like the most precious treasure in the room, like a queen, like my queen. The crown pulsed with gentle magic, and suddenly she could feel the emotions of everyone in the castle above them. The cook's contentment as she prepared fresh bread, the guards' loyalty as they protected the walls, the children's laughter as they played in the gardens. They already love you, Darius murmured, somehow sensing what she was experiencing. Even before they truly know you. How can you tell? Because I can feel it too, through our bond. He touched the side of her face gently. Being mated to you has made me stronger as well. Your magic doesn't just heal the land, it heals hearts. Sera looked at herself in the polished surface of a golden shield mounted on the wall. The girl staring back at her still had the same violet eyes and brown hair, but something fundamental had changed. She stood taller, her chin lifted with quiet confidence. The crown didn't sit on her head like a costume it belonged there. "I'm ready for the celebration feast," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She turned to face him fully, the crown's magic humming through her veins. "I spent too many years hiding from who I could become. I won't waste any more time being afraid." Darius's wolf purred with approval, a sound she could feel in her bones. "Then let's go show our people their queen." As they climbed the stairs back to the castle proper, Sera realized something important had shifted inside her. The frightened girl who had knelt on the auction block was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight for her people, her magic, and her love. The celebration could bring new challenges. Other kingdoms might not accept an Omega Queen. Enemies could try to use her past against her. But with the Earth crown on her head and Darius by her side, she finally understood what real strength felt like. It felt like coming home to herself. Thunder crashed outside the castle windows on Coronation Day. But inside the Great Hall, 1,000 candles cast dancing shadows on stone walls, covered with fresh flowers that had grown from Sera's touch. She stood before the massive wooden doors, wearing a gown the color of spring leaves, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped Darius's arm. "What if I trip and fall flat on my face in front of everyone?" she whispered, trying to peek through the crack between the doors at the hundreds of people waiting inside. Darius chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "Then I'll fall right beside you, and we'll be the clumsiest royal couple in history." "That's not helping." But she couldn't stop herself from smiling. "Ready, Your Majesty?" asked Captain Marcus, the head of the royal guard, his gruff voice unusually gentle. The doors swung open, and a hush fell over the crowd. Every seat in the Great Hall was filled nobles from distant kingdoms, farmers from nearby villages, merchants, soldiers, children, and elders. All of them had come to witness something that hadn't happened in 50 years, the crowning of an Omega Queen. Sera's legs felt like jelly as she took her first step down the long aisle. The earth crown on her head seemed to pulse with warmth, reminding her that she belonged here. As she walked, she caught sight of familiar faces. Cook Maria, who had taught her how to make proper tea. Young Tommy, the stable boy who always smiled when she passed. Even stern Lord Henrik, who had opposed her engagement at first, now nodded respectfully. But it was the faces she didn't recognize that made her heart swell. Families who had traveled for days just to see her. Children pressing their noses against windows to get a better look. These were her people now, not because she ruled them, but because she chose to serve them. "Look at their eyes," Darius murmured beside her, too quiet for anyone else to hear. "They're not seeing someone who was bought at an auction. They're seeing hope." At the altar, the ancient priest waited with a smile creasing his weathered face. Father Benedict had performed coronations for 3 generations of kings, but this was his first Omega Queen. In his hands, he held the ceremonial bowl of earth from every corner of the kingdom. "People of Shadowmere," his voice boomed across the hall, "today we crown not just a queen, but a healer. Not just a ruler, but a nurturer of life itself." Sera knelt on the velvet cushion, her gown pooling around her like green water. The priest began the ancient words, but her attention drifted to a little girl in the 3rd row who was watching with wide, amazed eyes. The child couldn't be more than 6, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. That could have been me, Sera thought. Poor, forgotten, believing I had no value. Do you, Sera of the Earth Magic, promise to use your gifts for the protection and prosperity of this kingdom and all who dwell within it? I do. Her voice carried clearly through the hall. Do you promise to rule with wisdom, compassion, and strength, putting the needs of your people before your own desires? I do. The priest smiled and gestured for her to rise. Then by the power of the ancient bloodlines and the magic that flows through your veins, I crown you Queen Sera, first of her name, protector of the growing things, beloved of the pack. He lifted a second crown, one made of silver and diamonds, that had belonged to queens for centuries. As it settled beside the earth crown on her head, the two pieces of royal regalia began to glow. Silver light mixed with green, and gasps echoed through the hall, as flowers bloomed spontaneously. From every wooden surface, the pillars, the pews, even the priest's ceremonial staff. "Magic recognizes magic," Father Benedict announced with wonder in his voice. "The kingdom itself welcomes its new queen." The crowd erupted in cheers so loud that the windows rattled. Sera felt tears on her cheeks but didn't care. She turned to face her people, truly her people now, and raised her hand. Silence fell instantly. 6 months ago, I knelt in this kingdom's auction square, with nothing to my name but shame. She began, her voice strong and clear. I believed the world when it told me I was worthless. I believed that being unwanted meant being unworthy. The little girl in the third row leaned forward, hanging on every word. But I learned something important. Worth isn't something others give you. It's something you discover in yourself. And sometimes, the very things that make you different are the things that make you precious. She looked directly at the child, speaking to her as much as to the crowd. Never let anyone convince you that you're not enough. Never let anyone's rejection define your value. You are more powerful than you know. Darius stepped forward and took her hand. Together, they faced their kingdom, a king who had been cursed and alone, and a queen who had been discarded and forgotten, now united and whole. We have work to do, Sera continued. Children to heal, crops to grow, and a future to build together. But first, let's celebrate. Music filled the hall as the feast began. Sera moved through the crowd, no longer the frightened girl who had hidden in corners. She spoke with farmers about their harvests, listened to mothers worry about their sick babies, and promised the children that she would teach them how to make flowers grow. As the evening wore on, she found herself back at the little girl from the third row, who had been too shy to approach the royal table. "What's your name?" Sera asked, kneeling to the child's level. "Lily," the girl whispered. "My mama says you used to be sad like me." "I was very sad for a very long time." "What makes you sad, Lily?" "The other kids say I'm weird because I talk to plants, and they seem to listen to me." Sera's heart nearly stopped. She looked closer at the child and saw it the telltale shimmer in her eyes that meant magic was awakening. Another earth-touched Omega, probably the first to be born since Sera herself. "Would you like to learn a secret?" Sera whispered. Lily nodded eagerly. Sera touched a wilted flower in a nearby vase, and it bloomed instantly into vibrant red roses. "Plants listen to me too, and that doesn't make us weird, it makes us special. Would you like me to teach you?" The little girl's face lit up like the sun coming out from behind storm clouds. "Really? You'd teach me?" "Every week, if your mother agrees." Being different isn't something to hide, Lily. It's something to celebrate. As Sera stood back up, she caught Darius watching her with such love in his eyes that her heart skipped. He had seen her find her first student, her first chance to pass on what she had learned. The cycle was beginning again. But this time, no child with earth magic would grow up believing they were worthless. This time, they would know from the very beginning that they were treasures waiting to be discovered. Thunder still rumbled outside, but inside the castle, laughter and music chased away every shadow. The Omega, who had once been sold for a single silver coin, now wore 2 crowns and held a kingdom's love in her hands. And she had finally learned the most important truth of all. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as the things nobody wants, waiting for someone wise enough to see their true value. The feast continued late into the night, but Sera's real celebration had already begun in the spark of recognition in a little girl's eyes, and in the knowledge that she would spend the rest of her life making sure no child ever felt as unwanted as she once had. Her story had truly just begun.